Good afternoon. This is the Thursday, September 26, 2019 work session, which we will now call to order. Members of the board, you've seen the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Ayes have it. The motion carries. The agenda is approved. I would note that Mrs. Cock is on the way and told us to go ahead and begin in her absence, but she will be here shortly. So, Madam Superintendent.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are pleased first this afternoon to begin with some recognitions, both for our Virginia Index of Performance Schools and also our 2019 Exemplar Performance School Awards for student achievement and continuous improvement. So while we make our way down to the front to join in the recognition, I believe Dr. Tigan is going to come forward to get us started.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the school board, and Dr. Cashwell. It certainly is an honor to be here this afternoon to recognize our schools. We will start with the Virginia Index of Performance Awards, which are based on the prior accreditation standards through VDOE, and 19 Henrico schools earned the 2019 Virginia Index of Performance Awards for Advanced Learning and Achievement. The VIP incentive program recognizes schools and divisions that exceed state and federal accountability standards and achieve excellent goals established by the governor and the board. Please join me in congratulating the principals, teachers, support staff, students, and families of the following Henrico schools for the academic successes and hard work these awards represent. These schools are not only the highest performing in our Commonwealth, but among those that are the best in the nation. So we'll start with the Board of Education Excellence Award. To earn the Board of Education Excellence Award, the schools also met all the state and federal accountability benchmarks and made significant progress toward goals for increased student achievement and expanded educational opportunities set by the board. Starting with elementary schools, Colonial Trail Elementary, Mr. Kevin Schatz. Echo Lake Elementary, Miss Cindy Faust. Cackley Elementary, Miss Cindy Patterson. Knuckles Farm Elementary, Miss Crystal Metzger. Rivers Edge Elementary, Miss Pamela James. Shady Grove Elementary, Dr. Stacy Austin. Short Pump Elementary, Dr. Sarah Slaughter. Three Chopped Elementary, Miss Dana Baldacci. Tuckahoe Elementary, Miss Sonia Ford. And Twin Hickory Elementary, Miss Brooke Davis. And now for our middle schools. Holman Middle School, Dr. Susan Prophet. Moody Middle School, Miss Denise Doss. And our high schools, Deep Run High School, Dr. Brian Fellows. And Godwin High School, Miss Lee Donovan. We also have schools that are recognized through the VIP awards for the Board of Education Distinguished Achievement Awards. And to earn this award, the schools must meet all federal and state benchmarks and make progress towards the goals of the governor and the board. At our elementary level, Gayton Elementary, Dr. Kirk Eggleston. Glen Allen Elementary, Miss Melissa Halquist-Pruden. And Pemberton Elementary, Dr. Joe Kuntz. At the middle school level, Pocahontas Middle School, Mr. Thomas McCauley. And Short Pump Middle School, Miss Kim Ziegler. And at the high school level, we have Glen Allen High School, Mr. Reggie Davenport. And as we've transitioned to a new accountability system, the Board of Ed approved the criteria for new awards beginning in April of 2018. And the Exemplar Performance School Recognition Program was established and aligned with the Board of Education's revised accreditation standards and replaces the Virginia Index of Performance Recognitions Awards. You will notice some of the same schools being recognized that just received the VIP awards. They've been awarded both on the previous accountability system as well as the current one. The Exemplar Performance Awards criteria are designed to complement the Commonwealth's recently revised accreditation standards. The awards recognize schools that are exceeding state accreditation standards and schools that are making continuous improvement in improving outcomes for students and narrowing achievement gaps. So please join me in congratulating our Board of Education Highest Achievement Award schools. They had to meet the benchmarks of having a 70% pass rate on state assessments in science and mathematics, a 75% pass rate in state assessments in English, reading, and writing, have no more than a 5% gaps for or a 10% gap if their schools have 3 or more student groups in English, reading, and writing between the lowest performing group and all other students in the school, and have no more than a 5% gap for students with 2 student groups or a 10% gap for students with 3 or more student groups in mathematics between the lowest performing group and all other students in the school. Thus, the focus truly is on that closing achievement gaps. And we have Colonial Trail Elementary, Mr. Kevin Schatz. Knuckles Farm Elementary, Miss Crystal Metzger. River's Edge Elementary, Miss Pamela James. Sandston Elementary, Miss Kim Powell. And Twin Hickory Elementary, Miss Brooke Davis. The Board of Education also has a Continuous Improvement Award, and so these had to meet the rating of accredited or accredited with conditions and meet at least one of the criteria for closing achievement gaps. And we have 2 schools. Jackson Davis Elementary, Miss Christine Bonner. And Montrose Elementary, Mr. Ted Derniak. No hoopla? So please join me again in congratulating each and every one of our schools. This award is about leadership, but it takes the work of the whole school. So thank you all. We are very proud of you, and we're proud of the work that you do for our students here in Henrico County. Congratulations. say, do we trust the secondary behind you?
I think we should start every meeting like that from now on. So that was very awesome. Congratulations again to all of you. And please pass along to your teams back at your building how proud we are of you, and we appreciate all the hard work. So, members of the board, the next item that we have on the agenda is to move to closed session for purposes of discussion of matters covered under items A1 of Section 2.2, 3711 of the Code of Virginia, 1950, as amended, pertaining to the following: the assignment, appointment, performance, disciplining, and release of contract for specific school board employees. Members of the board, is there a motion that we go to closed session for those purposes?
So moved.
It's been moved by Mrs. Augmiron. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Pike. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Ayes have it. We'll retire to closed session. Thank you. All right, good afternoon. Welcome back to everybody from the closed session. The next item is to certify that only those items that were identified in the motion in which the school board moved for closed session were discussed during that closed session. Is there a motion to so certify?
So move.
Moved by Reverend Cooper. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Cock. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. The closed session is certified.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, for the first item, I am requesting your approval for the appointment of administrative personnel for the 2019-2020 school year.
Members of the board, we've seen the superintendent's recommendation for appointment of the selected administrative personnel. Is there, I beg your pardon? You said the transportation?
Administrative personnel for the 19-20 school year.
Thank you. I beg your pardon, for the administrative appointments for the school year. Is there a motion to adopt the superintendent's recommendation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, thank you. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The appointments are presented.
Thank you. And the board has just approved Adrian Cole Johnson, Director of Family Engagement, Dr. William Crowder Jr., Assistant Director of Career and Technical Education, Katie Taylor, Associate Principal, Adams Elementary School, Dr. Jay Bodas, Educational Specialist, Clinical School-Based Mental Health Supervisor, and the board will have an opportunity to meet a number of these individuals as well as those approved at the last work session at this evening's monthly meeting.
Thank you very much, and we do look forward to that. If you'd want to move to the next item, please, the
Yes.
legislative agenda.
Yes, next, we'll provide an opportunity for the board to review and discuss the creation of the 2020 legislative agenda package, and Bev Lammy is coming forward to get that started.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board, and Dr. Cashwell. I'm delighted to be back again with you all in our process that we do every year. I've just had a wonderful week of legislative activity. We had our State Board of Education meeting last Thursday, and as you all possibly are aware, they're in the process of reviewing and redoing and rewriting the standards of quality. So, of course, that has huge implications for school divisions. Their final vote, I think, is going to be on October 17th, and all those recommendations will go to the governor. The other one was Tuesday of this week. The School Board Association, your organization, had a wonderful advocacy conference for I guess school board members and invited guests, we are always invited to come, which is wonderful. And then on yesterday, all of the legislative liaisons met together, which was wonderful to precede this meeting about what other school divisions are looking at as far as their legislative issues. So, purpose of today is just to put in front of you again our legislative calendar, which will be school board meetings between now and December, and then we will have our legislative breakfast, inviting our legislators to that on December the 13th at Hermitage. It seems to be a very, very popular item with our legislators that they talk about with other school divisions and localities. So very, very proud of the fact that we do it in a school. I think it's just really, really neat. The other item that I brought in front of you, of course, was last year's legislative agenda, but mostly, perhaps today, our discussion, brief as it might be, is about our probable legislative issues that we are hearing about around the state. These were ones that more or less were compiled from summer and last spring unfinished legislation. Certainly the most important topic of discussion on Tuesday and on Wednesday was funding. And we are cautiously optimistic, but other folks that are traveling in other circles are feeling very much that we may not have much increase to public education's budget. I think the rebenchmarking figure, if y'all remember, rebenchmarking is like when they get ready to do the budget, they go back through and they adjust the amounts that are needed for all of those accounts that are in basic aid. And the rebenchmarking totals were $595.7 million. And I think that was sticker shock for a lot of folks. So we will see. There's been a lot of discussion about teacher salaries, teacher shortage. Very excited about the Education Coalition that has created a wonderful document. I'm hoping that they are going to share that electronically with everyone, school boards included. It is just a kind of a summary of where we are with our teaching staff in the state of Virginia and things that we feel like we can do for retention, recruitment, and really absolute employee satisfaction and joy in the job. One of the things that I think we also talked about yesterday, and one of our school division groups has made a list of all of the unfunded mandates that have pretty much been in existence. Certainly we took it back to 2009 when this recession started, and all of the things that have been passed. And each one, and each time, it's just one small thing, as a legislator will say. But those one small things have added up to significant amounts of money that our school divisions are responsible for using local dollars. So we're going to keep track of that, and to be sure, the funding issue is going to be front and center with all of us. The unresolved legislation regarding school safety, if you all remember, there was a bill finally passed about school counselor ratios. The bill passed, and then the appropriations was never done, and so they basically didn't fund it. So we are going back to the drawing board and trying to make sure that they understand that possibly another way to come at this is not so much specific ratios for school counselors, but to look at a more flexible approach that would give school divisions, local school divisions, the options of deciding if they got a pot of money that is dedicated to student support staff. These are people that directly serve students, like your school counselors, your school social workers, your school psychologists. So we're going to see where that's going to go. We've had the discussion with the governor's office, and hopefully maybe there will be some conversation about that. The support cap is where these people now live, and it is just all local money if we are doing these student support positions. The other thing has to do with there's some discussion about obviously our school resource officers. Several of those bills were kind of left on the floor. One of them in particular was passed, and it was quite a significant bill about training, and it too had no money attached to it. So it does not become effective until the school year 2020. So we're going to have another shot at that this session, and we will certainly be looking at making sure that legislators understand that training is not free. It's either release time for your staff, it's extended days of a contract, all of those things. We feel really certain that the the student discipline bills are going to come back. We are really going to try to work very hard. I've even sort of started a discussion group with some of the agencies that really have been pushing this very, very hard with the, doing away with disorderly conduct. It cannot be used for students and student infractions. In our schools, the long-term suspensions and the no suspensions for elementary students is still very much of interest to these groups. So we will continue to try to have discussions. Last year, you all were wonderful. We asked, it's not often that I send something out to you all as school board members and say, we need your help, but the phone calls and emails do make a difference. They do. When they get hit with an onslaught of school personnel that are elected officials saying this is not a good idea, I think it makes a difference. We still always will have our, I think, homeschool advocates that want the benefits of public schools, and we take a different position on that. So, as I said, revisions to SOQs will be probably the one that will take up a lot of our time and discussion as it relates to budget. So anything else that you all know that you are hearing in your circles that are bubbling up, be happy to take those suggestions today, but I think when we come back again in 2 weeks, that's really the purpose of that conversation, is to really kind of get your input and then start building our 2020 agenda. One of the things that's kind of wonderful is that we're going to lose 3 pages of our agenda from last year because we passed the calendar bill. So that was great news in a lot of ways. So anything in the way of suggestions or input or questions that you all might have that I can research and get back to you?
Anyone? Yes.
I have just a couple comments. When you get that list of unfunded mandates, if you could share that with us, I know you said you were going to keep track of it. If you could share that with us, I think that would give us some ammunition of things we could advocate for and against.
Absolutely. I'll make sure I do that.
Obviously, if we're advocating for funding, when you just talk generically and say unfunded mandates, I think ears kind of close up. So
Sounds like fake news.
yeah, exactly. Sounds like fake news. So it would be nice to have something that we could be specific about. But there have been just recently, I know it's an election year, so people are talking, but there have been comments about trying to raise teacher salaries. I know Delegate Cox, for example, said, I want to try to get to the national minimum in 4 years. Others are saying different things. But since in Henrico we have the unified pay plan, this presents us a challenge. Is when, for example, when you go and talk to legislators about pay raises, I assume you bring up our unified pay plan challenges to
Yes.
them? Because I know that makes us different from other counties.
It does. And
Does
I
that
really...
cripple, do you think that hinders your work in that area at all?
No, I do tell them, and I think I don't know if there are any other school divisions in the state. I know at one time, that's probably a couple years ago, I tried to kind of informally survey to see if there were other localities, and that may be something that, other agencies would know. But we do... we try very hard to help our Henrico people understand that, because there have been years that the state has been very, quote, generous and given pay raises, but that we would not be able to take advantage of it because the incredible cost to our school division, to our county, not school division. I think it's an important piece. I think what we're probably going to see, the 5% jump was significant. And I think it was trying to make a statement that we acknowledge and recognize the dwindling numbers of teachers, number one, nationally going into the profession, and number two, the retention is another key piece and concern of everyone. So that was a statement they made. I know others have said 5% for 3 years would be getting us closer to where we need to be. I think financially, not many of us feel like that's possible. But certainly appreciate your comment, and I'll make sure that our folks know that, our Henrico legislators know that, so that they have a better understanding of what the result will be with our Henrico staff.
Right, and it is certainly, we support raising teacher salaries, but on the county side, we have to come up with the funding. But and some years it's a match, situation where we have to match what the state does or whatever counties can submit is what the state gives you. But I do think that that goal of reaching at minimum the national average is a great goal. That seems to me something people can wrap their heads around when they realize that Henrico is under the national average. Because I don't
Right.
think that is said very often. And
Well, we certainly do.
well, I'm sure you
But,
do.
yes,
just
I
feel
understand.
like maybe if we're saying it too, and anybody who's advocating it uses that phrase, it's not one that I think I've used very often. But anyway, the other thing I was going to ask you about is where you think we are with the school safety legislation. Do you see any traction in getting some more support for SROs? I know it's on your list but it is a concern. I have constituents all the time who'll say, why can't we have more SROs, have them in every school, have dedicated, and I know that this is a national conversation.
Right.
But do you see something coming forward or support for example, funding for that? Again, it's probably going to be mandated and unfunded, but it's,
I'm not sure we're going to see mandated increases in staffing for SROs, and I will tell you that probably the reason for that is some of the small school divisions, they do not have the personnel. They have grave concerns about, the state dictating that we must have, for instance, just even we must have an SRO in every high school, every middle school. They have grave concerns about that, and that is in one reason why their voices were what shaped the legislation that passed about school security officers. These are not armed individuals, but they are people who are dedicated to studying and evaluating and monitoring and tracking and, being very vigilant about school safety. So I don't know. I don't want to, put a black cloud over it, but I would have to say, because we did have a really, really robust discussion last year, and we were not the only ones that wanted to take our retiring police officers and bring them into the school divisions, allowing them to keep their VRS retirement.
I was going to ask you about that next.
Right.
To me, those are
And
tied together.
that is an extremely unpopular even thought by VRS, because VRS is already always, they're under the gun to try to make sure they're financially stable. And certainly from their personnel that I spoke with directly, and then others who I work with that had also had conversations with them, it was not even, wasn't even considered. And I guess, because as many of them said, you open that door for one group. We did it for critical shortage teachers because we couldn't find the teachers. Now, if we got to a situation that we couldn't find the police officers to be our SROs, that might be a different conversation. But they asked that question directly. Are you having trouble filling your school security staff? And most people said, well, no, we really are, we work really, really well with their police departments or sheriff departments.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's a reality, but it doesn't mean it has to stay that way.
Right.
Very good. Anyone else? Mr. Pike, please.
Mrs. Lammy, with regard to the suspension situation, and I think there's a direct piece of that goes to teacher retention also, in that I think classroom teachers across the Commonwealth of Virginia, if we really ask them why they resigned or why they felt like they couldn't do this job anymore, I wonder how much of it is tied to being able to manage that classroom in an effective way and receiving the support that they need to be able to understand that youngster, understand that youngster's family, and to be able to process that in such a way that there's help for that youngster and that family in working through those things. Legislators, if they think that working in that classroom, be it at the elementary or secondary level, in difficult situations with students that may prevent challenges, they need to come and spend a day and find out. Because I think there's a relationship there between difficult students and retention of teachers. And I know that's a slippery slope, but it's really, really important in looking down the road and looking at the future that that's given some consideration, because sometimes you get to the point to where you need a break from working through a difficult set of circumstances, and you know, being able to say to a parent, we need for your son to stay home or your daughter to stay home until we can work through this. That's a little breathing room for people to get their heads together and to figure out some stuff. But I tell you, that's something that we need to really take a careful look at and figure out the best way to try to help students and families and teachers in working through those sets of circumstances that are extremely difficult. So.
Well, thank you. And VEA representative, their president was there yesterday in our meeting, and we were asking her a very similar scenario, what you have just suggested, that do they have data, exit surveys, do they have, you know, even when teachers are actually employed, have they reached out and done surveys about what kinds of issues are your greatest challenges or whatever? So she was going to check on it and historically to see if there's any data available, but I think some of that information can be pulled as we are looking now more and more to try to figure out a way for school divisions to do school climate surveys, because what you've said is absolutely some of the conversation that I had with two of our legislators last year, that we all want to help the children and help the child, but the child can't function in a regular classroom. So then that becomes the situation of what do we do with that child to best serve him, her, and the family. And sometimes, and really, Dr. Knoll was wonderful when he came down to testify a couple years ago, because he said sometimes that suspension is the breathing room that we have to try to help the child kind of just, okay, let's get you out of the environment and then let's just try to see what is it that's causing it. And then he said the other great piece of that is that it requires the parent to come back and then they sit down with us to try to see what we can do for that child. So yeah, there's a lot of, that's why I said I love this job. It's teaching. I mean, it's constantly teaching legislators and really others in the public what that really means. And I appreciate very much your comment, because I really do believe that at the heart of it, particularly teachers that are dealing in, well, they're teaching in challenging circumstances, either through large, and I mean statewide, large class sizes, families that, you know, parents are not involved in their child's education. It becomes very, very difficult. But thank you, and we are certainly going to be pursuing those conversations.
Thank you. You have something? Yeah, please.
On a total different trajectory. Last year there was a lot of talk about mandatory planning times. Do you see that that's going to raise its head again?
The mandatory planning time, I have not had any, or I've not heard any movement about that other than, and I don't know if you mean like for elementary,
Yes,
for elementary schools. No, not recently, but I can certainly make sure that we check on that and see if there's any movement about it. Okay?
Anything else, Ms. Scott? Anything? All right. Well, just a couple. A few years ago, there was conversation about the governor's school funding formula. Where did that sort out, and is that, or is it still percolating?
Well, the last time that I checked, which was last year, we had a conversation with one of the parents who was downtown, and I feel like they felt like it was getting addressed. It was not a sudden thing.
Right.
But the staff, the budget staff, felt like they could take care of the disparity in the funding, which is, I think, where we were kind of looking at that,
right,
between half-day programs, full-day programs, and, trying to see that they're not all even Steven, that some should be receiving more funding than others. So, I will check on that, because I know that there was a keen interest by you all. So I will go back and just see. I have a contact that was one of the parents that was more or less in kind of leading that whole conversation with legislators.
Right.
Yeah.
Just if you could get us an update on that and whether
Absolutely.
we need to weigh in on it. And as I recall, what it was, so we have the 3 full-day programs across the state.
Right.
And then we have a number of those that are part of the day, mostly in more rural counties, and that the funding was such that the full day received more, but it wasn't, quote, twice as much or something of that nature. It was just proportionally more. And so the idea was not to
Right.
try to reduce what the other counties were receiving, but to make certain that the 3 full-day programs got an equivalent recognizing that they were a full-day program.
Right.
Which, of course, flows down to us because it affects the...
It's the per pupil.
Yeah, it's a per
Sure.
pupil tuition which we paid, which then affects what we have available to spend on other students. So we just should be mindful of it and make sure that we're not just carrying the load without checking.
Okay.
Is there, let's see here. Is there any conversation about providing, excuse me one moment. Siri wants to answer the question for me, apparently. We'll get your answer, then we'll check with Siri. Interesting. Haven't had that happen before. Is there any conversation about providing, we were just talking, Mr. Pike's point, I guess, about the social and emotional support of students, not just training teachers to do it, but to in fact provide, we all recognize that schools are being asked to do more and more of things, mental health and mental support and emotional support that ordinarily or in the past were not a school responsibility. And as we work to reduce suspension and the other ways that schools have traditionally dealt with, or sometimes have dealt with, at least going back in time, dealt with issues and now trying to deal with them more within the building and within the community. Is there any support, any effort to provide more support at the state level, not just looking at ratios, but in fact,
Right.
providing personnel and providing the funding to provide that? So, for example, even if it were to flow through the Henrico Mental Health or through some of the other social services programs, but sending it for direct support into the school building.
I think that Dr. Cashwell, I know in a conversation with a legislator, expressed concerns about the fact that we don't want, as a school division, to be taking on the role of counseling children with mental health issues, and the social workers need to be involved if it's a family issue. But I think where we are it seems like most school divisions, as a conversation yesterday certainly was a big part of it. I think most school divisions are really hoping that if we can get the funding increased for this, that really changed that whole concept of the support cap that went on in 2009, that if we can get some additional funding for what we consider to be critically important student support, that we are looking at school psychologists, school social workers, behavior analysts, I know was one of the ones that, was mentioned. But I think hopefully that's where we're looking to try to increase staffing using hopefully hopefully it's going to be a merged pot of money. They're looking at maybe taking at-risk add-on and merging it with some of the other pots that have been out there that have kind of been, still kind of getting at the same thing.
Right.
So that was one of the things that evidently someone had heard from one of the staff members. We will just have to kind of, we've certainly voiced our opinions with Holly Coy, who is the education, she answers to the Secretary of Education but gets information directly to the governor. She is very aware of the stories that we have painted for her as to this need that is just growing and growing. And alternate education or alternative education, that's not exactly where we're looking. We are looking so much more at trying to serve that child the closest that we can get them to their own school and their own family and community.
Sort of the wraparound services that we talk about all the time. Yeah.
Yes. In fact, health was even mentioned as one of those that you didn't mention, but I mean, like actually health, of the child.
And it may be that, our county has great resources, and we have the resources, and we're trying to put the two together, but we're trying to maintain the difference. We're right here in the shadow of the Capitol. It's nothing to say that we couldn't get with our county counterparts and say, let's don't just watch and see what's going to happen. Let's go forward with a plan, perhaps, that said, this is how you could serve Henrico County students best. And we do it with our federal programs a lot, where we blend those dollars, braid those dollars in order to make sure that we're maximizing them. And I don't know why. Perhaps there's a reason, but I think that we could offer ourselves up as a model.
A model.
And then try to get the legislation to support it, as opposed to just saying, and maybe we're doing it already, but opposed to just saying, we need more of this and more of this and more of this. We could possibly say, we would like to build this because it will do better. The sum will be greater than the whole will be greater than the sum of the parts if we do it that way. Just a thought.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if I might respond to that, I think you bring up a great point, and it's one that we've begun to explore a bit. And so while I think from an advocacy standpoint, and particularly I know a top item for superintendents across the state has been around this idea of the support cap and lifting that so that there's flexibility around what localities may want to do in relation to, maybe it's behavior analysts. You can't find a psychologist necessarily, but increasing school counselors. So I think that's still a priority when we think about what we can accomplish as a school division, but recognizing even with that, we can't be everything to everyone, and we need our partners, not only our community county government-related partners, but even some of our private providers to provide some plug-ins and wraparounds for what happens outside of the school day. So one thing we're beginning to explore is this notion of a full-service community center, full-service community learning center model. And we have seen some of those models in other localities where there are actually hubs in the community that are true partnerships between some of the school services plugged in with comprehensive mental health, social work services, and that sort of thing, where it's sort of a one-stop shop for families, and it provides a natural plug-in, and then those after-hour services continue through those centers, and even bringing in some private providers. I mean, looking at, particularly in this area, how we can partner with VCU and some of those health services that may be available to our families at a reduced cost, but there's a travel issue when it comes to getting there. So I think you're absolutely right that we can't ignore that piece of the puzzle when it comes to strengthening our partnerships with those around us. So we're definitely going to continue to push on that, in addition to looking at that support cap piece when it comes to SOQ and how that can be lifted to allow school divisions flexibility in staffing.
Yeah. And I think it's more persuasive when you're asking to lift something like the support cap or something like that, to say, here's what we're going to do if you lift it, versus so that we have the flexibility to decide how we're going to do it. That sounds like you lift it and we'll come up with a plan. And I know that's not our what we do, but I think if we say, if you lift it, here's what we will do with it, precisely what we will do with it, and this is the kids that's going to be affected. I think that carries a better. I think it's just more persuasive.
It's a stronger message.
Yeah, it's a stronger message.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not. Help us some, and then we'll let you know what we're going to do later. Let's see here. Oh, and then the last thing, and this is just a point of to make sure that, please, to share with our legislators, and that is that to make certain that they know when Henrico suspends or particularly long-term or expels or long-term suspends a student, that we provide services.
Yes.
That's often people have a misunderstanding that when we take our vote that a student's going to be out for 365 days, that we turn our backs on them. And I hardly remember more than a case or two of extreme conditions where we didn't provide an alternative education opportunity, and there's various ones, so that the division, and I say we, the division, but you work very hard to match the child up with the services that are most meaningful to them in the situation that they're in. So please let them know that when they're talking about ending suspensions or any of those sorts of things, that at Henrico, even though we put a child out for 365 days or something of that nature, we almost always provide an alternative education path for those young people. And it may not be perfect, and I know we can do better sometimes, but it's not as though we put a student out on the street and tell them to come back in 365 days and we'll try again. So please make sure they know that. I think that gets lost.
Well, thank you for the reminder. I think that you're absolutely right. That is a misperception along with some others that they have, but that is absolutely, it's been stated on the floor, it's been stated in committee meetings that we just abandon these kids to the streets, and nothing could be farther from the truth. So, yeah, we will make sure, again, that when we have the discussions about this particular bill, and in my writings to our legislators, I call them position papers, for no lack of anything else, but, yeah, I'll make sure. And maybe what we could do is actually, certainly not naming a student, but talk about these are the kinds of things that we actually do. There are concrete examples of this is what we do with this type of child.
I think that's very meaningful.
Yeah.
Because it highlights the good work that people are doing, but it also clears up that misunderstanding of how we're dealing with students on those case-by-case basis that people agonize over. I mean, it's not something that's done with any sort of routine whatsoever. So I believe that finishes up my list. Was there some,
I thought of
yes.
one other thing I want to put on your radar. Actually just sent you a copy of a letter that Dr. Lowry, who is the director of Maggie Walker, shared with our board, the Maggie Walker board, and asked that each county put this on their legislative agenda to look at the funding for governor's schools. And since we are, one of the larger
Participants, yes.
participants at Maggie Walker, I've sent you a copy of the letter, so you have all of the background behind. But it's funding for governor's schools was changed a few years ago, and the directors are all gathering together to request that funding formula be reexamined because funding was cut for governor's schools. So anyway, I've sent it to you, but
Thank
if
you.
we could make
Okay.
that part of our legislative agenda so that we are advocating for the same thing that the governor's schools are advocating for. It's more voices, I think would be really helpful. But
Okay.
I sent it to you, so for you to look at.
Anything else? Very good. And of course, we would support any effort, and I don't know what it would look like, but the state to address the teacher shortage, not just with pay, but in the education
Oh, we have
field.
talked about, absolutely, incentives. I mean, there's, the scholarship money that used to be available, and, that we've obviously, worked to do our own. But I think that's one of the things that they are continuing to talk about and trying to increase the money that's in that. And then really going after students, students that are actually in your school division. And one of the things that was said by VEA was, when was the last time that a current teacher excitedly talked about his or her job? And that's part of that whole, recruitment thing. We have to continue, even though we do have problems, we get beaten down during the day. But, we do have to talk about what an incredibly joyful experience it is to just awaken kids to, what's possible, particularly at the secondary level. What's the next step? Where are you going after you leave and cross that stage? So thank you for the reminder. Yeah,
I think it would be
appreciate it.
meaningful if the state could figure out, and maybe we just do it on our own division, if like those new, we interview teachers when they're leaving, but maybe interview a teacher at that third year mark, maybe say, what did you feel least prepared for? And then share that with our universities and colleges that are preparing the teachers and
Right.
with our state accreditation and say, we're doing a great job, but we're not doing all of the things that we should. Or maybe they say, you know what, I was well prepared, but I could have used more of this. But when I say what can we do to help recruit and retain and train more teachers, that's sort of what I'm thinking about, to make sure that they are getting, the state and the universities are getting the feedback and the accreditation are getting the feedback in licensing of teachers, that what they're doing is preparing a teacher to be successful in the classroom.
Okay.
And maybe maybe there's a work group already looking at that, but if it's not or whatever, at a state level, what we can do to improve things. So,
Okay.
and that's it for me.
Thank you very much. I
Thank
will
you.
be back in 2 weeks.
We look forward to it.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Lammy. Mr. Chairman and members of the board, for the next item, our Special Education Advisory Committee's annual report is coming forth for your review for the 2018-2019 school year. And Ms. Donna Davenport is joined this evening by Samantha Davis and Shannon Richard from our SEAC, and they are going to begin with the review. All right.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the board, Dr. Cashwell.
every year I get to talk about the tremendous pride and respect that I have about our division's Special Education Advisory Committee. I talk to other directors from around the region, and I brag about just the quality and the work and the dedication that our SEAC members provide to our division, and just the passion that they bring in supporting us in the Exceptional Education Department and advocating for our students and across the division. I am excited today to introduce to you our former chair, Shannon Richard, along with Samantha Davis, who is our current chair of our Special Education Advisory Committee. And I would be remiss if I didn't also acknowledge our vice chair, who's sitting in the audience, because she would just be upset with me if I didn't say welcome to Monica Hutchinson as well. So thank you all.
Thanks, Ms. Davenport. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and Dr. Cashwell. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. A great deal of work has been done by the SEAC over the past year. It has been analyzed and compiled faithfully by our wonderful chair, Shannon Richard. Ms. Richard has been a faithful guide for our committee and has done a tremendous amount of work over the past 2 years. She has our gratitude for a job well done, and I think she deserves the gratitude of the entire county. Ms. Richard has compiled this concise yet comprehensive report, and I hope that you read it thoroughly and refer to it, since I'm not likely to give it justice. These are the members of our SEAC. As you know, the role mandated to a Special Education Advisory Committee is to provide advice concerning the needs and education of students with different abilities, to educate and inform families, to assist in the formulation and development of long-range plans, to participate in the creation of priorities and strategies. The reason that we're here today, to present periodic reports and recommendations regarding the education of students with different abilities. And we also provide a forum where attendees can address general or systemic issues. We'd like to thank the, we'll get back to the activities in a minute or two. We're going to skip ahead. The SEAC would like to take this opportunity to express its appreciation and commendation for Henrico's sincere commitment to the education of children with disabilities. And particularly, we applaud the county for the following: expansion of post-secondary transition opportunities for students with different abilities, the Career Skills Exploration Program, and increased opportunities at the ACE centers, and a collaboration with DARS and other community partners. We are very excited for the funding for 46 new full-time instructional assistants. Also for the Life to Ready conference, 167 sessions provided professional development in special education, mental health, trauma-informed instruction, and more. Providing more consistent curriculum and resources to integrated services classrooms. And I've come up here during public comment a few times to thank you for the hiring of a dyslexia advisor. She is going to come and do another training with SEAC on October 22nd. And I also thank the board for implementation of a plan to screen kindergarten through second grade students for weaknesses and difficulties that may present later in their lives. We've also expanded the regional autism classrooms at Glen Allen High School and expanded the BLISS program. We strongly support the county's desire to maintain high expectations for children with different abilities and their teachers, and we're encouraged by the commitment to improve continuously as it services in order to achieve these results. There are 15 members of the SEAC that we meet in regular sessions during the school year. Because of overall interest and the desire for knowledge and change, the committee met in 5 presentation sessions, 4 committee planning sessions to study special education needs and concerns in the county, and 5 subcommittee meetings. I should also mention this was the year that 5 of our members were also involved in some of the committees well, they're very much involved in the committees that were in response to Ann Holton's report about students with disabilities in the county that you all, what's the word I'm looking for? Commissioned. And we have increased our working with family engagement over the past year, and we are doing presentations with them as well to enhance the roles of both together. We've met with both Ms. Davenport as the Director of Exceptional Education, and Pam Bell and Vivian Scythe Williams of Family Engagement. Yeah, and I mentioned 5 SEAC members served on committees and leadership roles for the review of equity and parent engagement in special education. I should also mention that our members served on more than one of these committees. We have a desire to have these plans implemented, and we're definitely willing to give our time for that. There's also been a creation and an implementation of a quick survey to get immediate feedback after an IEP to benefit from continuous feedback instead of receiving feedback once a year through our annual survey. During our monthly meetings, we serve as an important forum for interested patrons to speak, listen, and learn about special education issues. Our presentations this year included assisted technology, the view of the new superintendent, thank you for coming and speaking with us, positive behavior support strategies. As I mentioned before, Ms. Hodel came to talk with us about dyslexia. That really has been a wonderful improvement. I hear a lot of feedback from various schools, especially in elementary. And we learned about preparing for life beyond high school. And we had 3 subcommittees this year: communication, governance of services, and a teacher committee was new this year. It's really very important to note that the special education department is performing as well as it is, given the allotted resources and supports that they have been provided. However, this is only one factor, and as we mentioned last year, the SEAC recognizes that in order to make any systemic changes, a full commitment from the Henrico County as a whole is needed. Although some changes can occur through exceptional education department, systemic change cannot occur without the full support of the county. And we're still extremely concerned that there continues to be a common theme of inconsistency for families within schools as it pertains to student safety, academic progress, closing the gaps, and relationships. To move forward and provide our children with the special needs with the academic opportunities and the highest rigor that we can provide. We must continue to be committed to changing our approach as a county. These changes cannot be left just to the exceptional education department, as great a job as they have done with what they have, and we really appreciate them and all of their hard work. But this department does not oversee principals or teachers, and that's where a lot of the change needs to occur. It's important to understand that the majority of these recommendations that are being made to the school division are not a reflection of the performance of the exceptional ed department. We're requesting the support and consistency from the school board, principals, general education teachers, special education teachers, the exceptional education department, support staff, to make all these systemic changes occur and align with the vision that Henrico County Public Schools has. We created the annual parent survey this year. We decided to use the same or similar questions as the previous survey, and there's a reason why we did that. We want to emphasize that we are receiving the same responses that we did 2 years ago with remarkable consistency. Okay, and that brings us to our actual recommendations. And like I said, they're very consistent over the past several years, and we've brought these up. And they were also echoed in the report delivered by the Honorable Ann Holton when she expanded on the data that had been collected and used by SEAC. We've heard a lot about funding today, but we would encourage you to hire or provide funding to hire additional coordinators to provide sports and training, to hire special education liaisons, to continue to support funding to increase full-time instructional assistants, and also to fund a position through the Parent Resource Center with a large component to focus on special education. Increase the professional development. We'd like to support a plan to deliver basic professional development for all Henrico County staff members on de-escalation and conflict resolution throughout the 2019-2020 school year. We'd like to increase the training and professional development for all teachers. And they need more materials, time, and resources to adapt curriculum. Also asked to increase resources to, she just mentioned this about increasing the resources and also the incentives for teacher retention and growth. And we feel that this is desperately needed in the area of exceptional education. Increase the programs for Henrico County, support the plans to implement a specialty program for students with disabilities at the campus of Virginia Randolph in the fall of 2020. The teachers and staff at Virginia Randolph are very passionate about their work with their students, and they need the county's support to match their commitment. We also want to partner with outside organizations to provide certified professionals who can transfer evidence-based knowledge, skills, and best practices to schools and teachers on trauma-informed care and mental health needs. This is a personal concern of mine, to create and update the processes and procedures district-wide for continuity on how we handle children who have had trauma and mental health needs, and to ensure that they are all being implemented with regularity in all of the schools, which leads me to increased consistency. We need stronger universal screenings in reading, math, and behavior, increase in rigor and academic expectations for our students with different abilities, and increase the consistency in teaching, resources, and expectations, not only across exceptional education, but also across the county. We need to increase the inclusion opportunity for general education students to come to special education classes and work well together. Study after study shows that this is provide benefits for both the children in special education and also general education. But we really need to create a culture of inclusion that's supported by all the staff, that starts from administration and really is expected in all schools, to develop clear expectations of inclusion and to implement this model throughout Henrico County, not just in individual schools. Fidelity of implementation and expectation in all of them. We'd ask for increased communication, central office to increase communications to families in areas of improvement and growth that occur within special education on a yearly basis. Positive changes are being made, and it would be helpful for families to be aware of them and all of the work that's being done. We'd also like to see a creation of an IEP portal for parents, similar to a medical portal, that they have all the valuable needed information there, including their yearly IEPs and progress toward the goals, parent rights, and timeframes and testing results. In conclusion, on the basis of the work conducted by SEAC over the past year, results from the parent survey, parent input from meetings, work done in committees as it pertains to the review of equity and parent engagement in special education, and its past recommendations, the SEAC respectfully submits the following recommendations. The previous recommendations, I'm sorry. It's also important to note the areas for growth and their suggested resolutions were also presented in the 2017-2018 Four Cornerstone report, and those are still important and consistent with the feedback that we're still receiving. Please know that all of you are welcome to join us, and I think the work that we do is important, and I'd love to have your presence along with your support. Thank you so much for having us this afternoon.
Thank you very much for a very thorough report. Members of the board, are there any questions or comments?
Oh, if I might say, it's something I left out. On the parent survey, there's actually pages in the back of parent comments. So please make sure you give those a glance.
Okay, thank you.
They get down into quite specifics.
There's a lot of pages. So what you guys received, you'll get another report that sees the full survey with all the parent comments in there. But there was a good 20 to 30 extra pages. So what's in the actual, this report is not all those other comments, but that's available.
That's okay, thank you. Members of the board, do you have a suggestion?
I have a
Yes,
quick
Mrs.
question. When you were talking about the parent portal, if you could expand on that, I would love that idea, where you would have the IEP available, test scores, things like that. Do we have anything? I'm just curious.
Not that I'm
anything like
aware
that.
of.
I think that would be such a
Did you
valuable
wanna-
tool for our parents.
I will tell you, when Shannon mentioned this to me as an idea, I also was like, hey, that's a really great idea. And I've done a little bit of internet digging and asking around. And at this point, I don't believe that type of software exists that I'm aware of. It would be something that would be an add-on to our existing case management software, and that we would have to possibly go through an RFP process for. But I've searched, and I haven't found anything yet.
It would be such a valuable resource to parents to have everything in one location.
Absolutely.
Because I'm sure, and for staff as well, that, I just love that idea. Whose idea was that? It's a really good one. Really good idea.
That's a good one, yeah.
I like that.
I've also searched for this in terms of people just finding out that their child has some sort of special need. In Maryland, there's sort of a portal that you go directly in, and it sends you, here's where you go for this, and here's where you go for that. And that's sort of a dream of mine to create for our county. There are so many different places to go, and the information just isn't, well, cohesive at all.
Right.
So I usually end up sending parents, you need to go this place and this place and this place, and you need to do them all at once.
A central place to gather all of that.
Yes,
Even if-
definitely.
I'm sure you could bend Andy's ear and have our IT staff, that would be,
Right.
just to put all of that placed in the, because I know you have a SEAC page, if we could be links and stuff like that to information would be great. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is, if you don't mind going back to the page that has your membership.
Oh, that's page 2.
Mr. Pike and I were noticing the number of members you have on the SEAC committee, and this is going to come up for me at least when we talk about your bylaws. And I'm curious, because if you go to the one before that, you've got 4 members from Three Chott. You've got 3 from Fairfield that I think I count now, 2 from Fairfield, 1 from Brooklyn, 2 from Verona. I'm curious how you got lopsided in your representation across the county, and do you have more people who want to be on SEAC than there are spots, which I'm sure you don't, but I'm just curious, are you turning
Right.
people away from being on
Wouldn't that be a
SEAC?
lovely problem to have? We're sort of at the mercy of the applicants. We want to have people who have been involved and come to our meetings and have shown some familiarity with our exceptional education system. I'm sorry?
The positive
The
relationship.
positive relationships with our exceptional education. So, we're always on the search for new members, and we invite people all the time to come.
The other thing to note on that too, because we've been on it about, 5 or 6 years, is when we joined, I think 3 or 4 came in together, there was only 2 or 3 members. So now you're looking at 15 members. So over the period of a 5-year time period, I mean, the change in what kind of SEAC is looking at doing kind of has changed tremendously. So I think the other part of that is it wasn't so much about where people were from. If they're coming to meetings and they're interested, we're excited to have them. So that's where some of the bylaw change came before, where there's some limitations as to how many through there. We're like, if you're excited to be out here, then, come join us.
Right, gotcha.
Even if
I'm
they're
just
not voting
curious
members.
Because it looks, I know that, like Mr. Pike and I were talking about the Gifted Advisory Committee. We've got SEAC, we've got 3 different advisory committees that, for the board. And one of the things that's important to me is that, that membership be equitable and that we have equal representation across the county. I think that's very important. And so when I saw only 1 from Brooklyn, I'm like, uh-oh. Mrs. Cox probably has something to say about that. But to me, it's important that we have people from all across the county representing our county as it is. And I'm just curious how you got there. I appreciate you filling me in, but no criticism, of course.
No,
but-
Ms. Ogburn, if I can also, when we started building the current SEAC, and the members recognized that there were some gaps and there were magisterial districts that weren't represented. And I just want to give a shout out to our building principals, because I immediately sent communication to the division and all of the principals in those divisions, Brooklyn being one, saying, please reach out to your families, encourage them to apply to be a member of the SEAC, because we really want to have representation from your magisterial district. And that's why we are currently representing at least with 1 member from each magisterial district. And we do that every year, ask asking principals just to reach out so that we do try to get that equitable representation.
Right, okay, thank you.
Can I ask something? Yes. To your point, so I looked at, we know that it's can you down this real quick?
Oh, sure.
We know that it's mandated by VDOE, it's mandated, SEAC are mandated. So I guess for me personally, to Ms. Osborne, I was sitting there saying the same thing. So you have 21 members total, 15 outside of the purview of the other 1, 2. And so I would assume the 15 would be reflective and representative of parents, correct? So I guess for me, if it's a 3-year term, how do we equalize it in regards to, you know, the 3-year term and getting it to where it needs to be? Because I would argue that as a school board rep, as we look at these bylaws, I would want it mandated that if we have 5 magisterial districts and you have 15 seats, that 3 come from each magisterial district, period. And the seat stays unfilled until that gets filled or we figure out something else. Because if you have a 3-year term, then it's always going to be unequitable if you say. So it's almost like we might need to look at a reset and figure it out, because if not, you're going to have this disproportionate amount of people from districts. I mean, I'm glad that the time, you know, the time that you all put in, the volunteerism, I get it, and I'm appreciative for all the work you do. But I just know for me, because then when I read this, I started saying to myself, I want to know how many IEPs do we have in the county, right? And where are those IEPs? So if you have a disproportionate amount of IEPs with this many parents and children with IEPs, but yet they're not represented on the SEAC, and therefore that's another layer in the weeds of our non-representation. And so that's kind of how I was waiting for this. I didn't know if I was going to say it this part or when we go to bylaws, but I want to know, like, how many IEPs? I don't want names of children. I want to know, but then where are they?
Right.
Because I think there has to be kind of a correlation, because when you talk about equity, it's so much. It's curriculum, it's facilities, it's representation on committees. And I think that we're kind of, you know, it's amazing we made this transition from being woke to being conscious. And I just think that we have to look through the lens of equity in everything we do. And I think we can't just say, well, we didn't, you know, get the participation before. Well, now we know we didn't. What can we do? And how do we reset it? I mean, would you agree with that?
I totally agree. And that's one reason why I brought it up, because when we talk about the bylaws in a couple of minutes, I'm going to bring this up again, because I just think we need to be sure that the way people get on committees like this is equitable, and that the distribution of representation is equitable across the county. I really do think that's important. And whether we, for example, you say there are 5 spots, 4 spots, whatever the number of spots are, but I agree with Reverend Cooper. If they remain unfilled, and that lets people know there's room on these committees. I know that when I was on the board rep for the gifted committee, we had a number of people who wanted to be part of the gifted advisory committee, but the bylaws I think we're going to work on those for that committee as well. But I think we also have the equity and diversity committee, where we need to be sure that representation to that committee is exactly what the name says, it's equitable. So I think we need to get these 3 committees in line with each other of how many spots are there, how they're chosen, how they're appointed. But I mean, and hopefully what this will do is, if people find out there are spots, I think sometimes our constituents think, oh, that committee's full.
Right.
They don't understand that, yes, there are spots for them. Yes, they can serve. And, you know, by the time they get the message, it gets lost as to how they even get on a thing like this. Because I've had a number of people say, how do you get on SEAC? How does that even happen? So I think this is a communication thing we need to work on, but also just making sure that we're equitable across the county. I totally agree. We need to do it.
Did you
So-
want to?
Yeah, I think the other thing, though, is also looking at, like, big picture-wise. We're pushing that during IEP meetings, that our brochure is going out to families to know about SEAC. Most people don't know about SEAC. So the reality is, when you're going from a SEAC that's functioning of 2 to 3 people, you know what I mean? And now you have the numbers here. And then the other goal is to get them out there. We had someone come out the other night, and some of this is a voting member. We have multiple subcommittees. We made the teacher committee this year. We have added the principals. So really, when we're looking at bigger picture, we've added the teachers and principal component, trying to say, this has to be done as a whole. So again, you know, the beauty of the bylaws too is they can continue to be revised if we get into that problem. But, you know, my hope too is, having served on the committee for that amount of years and continuing to come back, is that maybe too, some of us serve the 3 years and then can pass the baton and continue to serve in other places. I mean, most of it is the longevity of so many of our members is because we don't have the members coming out to say, hey, we'll do it. So again, after 3 years, it may be like, yay, but this time again, we didn't have the numbers to say, okay, 5 of us can step down and more come in, you know, so.
I think if we do this, we're supporting that effort to increase the awareness
Yes.
of this committee, but also get you some new members and, you know, fresh ideas and share the work.
Yes, because we do want all parts of the district
Absolutely.
recognized. I mean, we are definitely on board with that.
Can I also say, I'm sorry, some of this, the divisions are a little bit misleading in my opinion. Like Miss Richard lives in Three Chopt, yet her children go to school in Tuckahoe. Same with Miss Hutchinson and a number of other members. So we might want to find a way to address that as well, whether we want to have people who are there representing the schools their kids actually go to,
Right.
or where they live.
Right. Good point. Yes, Mrs. Cox.
This has been a great discussion, and I would like to thank my colleagues for speaking up there on Brooklyn and in the whole picture, because one of the first things that I thought of when I read this report 2 nights ago was, where are my other 2 members from Brooklyn? Because of the inequity piece there. And I love the idea of leaving the spots open, because there's so many times that someone wants to get involved and maybe it's not, they don't know what it is that they want to do. And so to see that open, you know, that may speak to them, and then they would look a little further into it. So I think that will encourage new blood, or as I like to say, fresh eyes, on the subject, and get more people involved.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Can I add one more thing on the portal?
Yes.
So the other thing in looking at the IEP portal to think of big picture and hearing the presentation before is also then having those resources on the outside. I have a daughter with pretty significant medical, emotional, mental health needs, pretty significant. And the thing is, if there's a portal also that gives you information on accessing outside, how to get on a Medicaid waiver, how to access ABA. I mean, really, if as a school we're helping promote the services and resources that these families are getting in early, getting into therapies earlier, that's helping you guys big picture. And it's kind of like that collaboration there. A lot of these families are just overwhelmed. They don't know how to find the resources. But if they are getting on the waivers, if they are getting the ABA earlier outside, and then there's more collaborations within the school of how is this working, I think big picture-wise, that can be pretty significant.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for the thorough report and the follow-up. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Very good.
And if we might segue into the next item.
Yes.
It is an opportunity for the board to review and ask any questions as needed related to the updates to the special education advisory bylaws that the board was provided in advance. And I know some of that you all alluded to in the last item, but if we would formally move to that item now. And Donna Davenport is here to provide an overview, and we'll open it up for questions.
A very brief overview. As you are obviously very well aware, that during the 2018-2019 school year, the Special Education Advisory Committee determined that it was necessary to review and revise their bylaws. You've been provided with the final copy of the proposed SEAC bylaws, along with the red line version that shows each of the changes that were made to the document. You will see that almost all of the changes were not substantive and were made to clarify the language of the document. The document was reviewed by our school board attorneys to ensure that the bylaws are in compliance with federal and state regulations. The SEAC would appreciate the school board's approval of the revised bylaws. Upon approval, the bylaws will be posted on the SEAC webpage. The SEAC representatives and I are happy to answer any specific questions you may have about the different revisions that were made in the bylaws.
So who wants to go first?
I'll jump in
Okay,
if that's
go ahead,
okay.
Mrs. Albert.
What I was referring to is the section in the bylaws for the appointment of members and when you have vacancies. And the reason I thought about this is brought up to me from the Gifted Advisory Committee. What I'm hoping that my colleagues will agree with me on is that we need some consistency with the 3 standing committees that report to the board, and that would be our Equity and Diversity Committee, our SEAC Committee, and our Gifted Advisory Committee. So what I'd like to do is discuss how you actually appoint members, because I think that there, at least I know there is with Gifted, there is a difference between what your bylaws might say and what you actually do. And there has, there have been problems with that with other committees. I just want to be sure that we are serving our people well and making sure that when they would like to be on a committee, that they're given the opportunity to be. And I understand you don't have a lot of people lined up out the door to do this, but hopefully they would, maybe we can get some people to do it. But I just think that when, for example, we have X, and it doesn't say this in the bylaws, that we have X number of people per district, so that we're sure we have equal representation across the county. But I'd also like to see, my personal thought is that you guys would bring recommendations to the board, because from the way I read it, you have a membership committee who would field the names of people who would be interested. You would approve it as a committee and then bring it to the school board. But what I would prefer to see is that list come to the board for us, because we're supposed to appoint them, we're supposed to approve them, but y'all have already done it. And if we are ultimately responsible for the approval of these people who are going to serve, I would like to have that original list of, let's say 3 people applied, there's only 1 spot. How are you picking 1 out of 3, for example? I know the Gifted Advisory Committee faced this, and that's why I'm bringing it up. And so I think it would be great if you would bring all 3 names to the school board, and if we're going to actually appoint them, that we actually do that, as opposed to the committee itself deciding, and then people start serving before we ever even appoint them, which has happened, I know.
So I will say for the Special Education Advisory Committee, they do tend to have more of a rolling admissions process. The application is available on the SEAC webpage, and we will get applications periodically throughout the school year. So there's not a set application window. Those applications come directly to me. I have no say-so in the committee's decisions. I simply forward them on to the chair, who then shares them with the SEAC for that discussion. Our members do not serve on the SEAC until after they are formally approved by the school board. So they go through the process. They invite them to participate in a SEAC meeting as an observer or as, a visitor, and then have some conversation with them at that meeting, and then go through that approval process as it is written. But as I said, they are not inducted as members of the Special Education Advisory Committee until the formal school board approval.
Okay. I just know, and for example, your vacancies, and it says they present a slate of officers to the committee for approval to fill a vacancy. Nominees will be recommended to the superintendent for appointment by the school board. So it looks like to me there's a difference that happens when a vacancy occurs as to when the original.
So if someone were to step down, that, we wouldn't then say there's a vacancy. This was back from when there was 2 or 3 members.
Right.
So if you only have 2 members and you lose one, So this one kind of maintained within the bylaws as if all of a sudden we lost a teacher representative, so that's only one. So we need that. So that would then need an immediate fill with, 15 members through there. If someone stepped down again, that wouldn't warrant a vacancy. So really that came about because the numbers started so low. And really Ms. Davenport was saying, so even this year, we, our application numbers are much lower, but as soon as we get an application, then we reach out to the person and say, please come to the meetings. Like, come out, see what we're doing, be a part of it. You may not be a voting member, which we don't vote on much, you know? So the idea being then we know kind of what are we all getting into? Are you interested in this? Are you still interested in this? And if you are, then during that, usually it's like the May meeting or so, then we do the vote to send to you guys.
Right.
So,
Well, my suggestion, I don't know how anybody else up here feels about it because we're just talking about it. What I'd like to do is table this maybe and see what our other two committees, what their bylaws say, maybe look at other counties, how they do this, so that we can be sure we have equal representation across the county, make sure that we're doing this the right way, and then I don't know if there's any urgency to us approving this, but maybe we could approve it next month after we have the opportunity to do a little bit more work on this part of it. I'd like to see our three committees aligned of how we do this. And I know that the gifted, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Pike, I think our gifted advisory committee is actually waiting to see how this goes and what changes are done before they think about how they're going to do it. Am I right? That's what I've been told.
I agree with Mrs. Ogburn, too. I think we'd like to see that these are parallel in terms of bylaws, that they match up and that the opportunities are there across the county for anyone that is interested. And I go back to what Reverend Cooper said earlier in terms of that representation by managerial district. I think that's important, too. And I know, believe me, how tough it is to get positions filled. And I think you've done an outstanding job. But if we can, like Mrs. Auburn's suggesting, table it and allow a little bit more clarity there for some of those things, I think that would be helpful for all the committees.
And align them all. That's my sense.
I think one thing to mention also, though, is some of the wording change, big picture wise, is SEAC has also had some people that aren't always, there's more emotion per se that goes into things. So I think the important thing is also then, if we do look at changing it that way, is how are we going to make sure, one of our main things is making sure the candidate has a positive kind of working relationship. And again, I don't know that your other committees are running into maybe some of the things we may be seeing. So I think the important thing is also then making sure that our input, and if these people then are coming to meetings for 5 or 6 months versus the person who may have applied who hasn't come to a meeting at all yet, and that's okay, that's also looked at in the big picture of things. So I think our makeup and kind of what we're doing is a little bit different. So yes, I think there's importance in aligning, but I think it's also important to look at big picture-wise maybe the history of things, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Yep.
So to your point, I concur. I think that to my peers, it's imperative that as we look at the parallel to these, that we let them make sure that they're independent, they maintain their independence from us, so that as far as their process, as far as person's representative, so that they won't, lose the credibility, i.e. that they're not like handpicked by us, but we trust their process, in which we allow them to fill their positions. And then we got to be careful. There's a difference between equality and equity, right? So we just make sure everybody knows the difference between the two words in regards to what we're saying in regards to districts and the persons represented. But we spent a bunch of money to get an outside independent review of all of our special ed, and we've got our working committees, and we are committed, and we understand that the distinctive difference that you as parents who are in the trenches with your children every day, caring for them, providing for them, as we do too. So I want to make sure we keep that in mind, just the independence of the committee, and making sure that the community knows that they operate outside of us.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, too, that we do appreciate is some of the committees, there is these adversarial things that go on with the SEACs. And I think one thing that we're super proud of is the relationship of our SEAC and special ed and the school board, that we really feel like it's that big picture we're going for. So a lot of the wording here, due to the history and stuff, which is why we spent so much time on the bylaws, trying to make sure this maintains a positive working relationship with anybody who wants to be out here doing it with us. So thank you.
Reverend Cooper, one more thing. You had asked a question, and I don't want to let it go by as far as the number of students with disabilities in our division. I don't have a heat map as far as where they are located, but we can work on that. But as of our December 1 child count in 2018, we had 6,823 students identified under IDEA. 6,823. That number is increasing.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Anything else, board members? So I think then that and I understand what you're saying is you can advocate without being adversarial, and that's the balance that you're looking to strike. And in each of the committees, it does have some uniqueness because of a variety of things. But on the other hand, there's also some similarities. So perhaps we can step back and look at those. And I don't believe that there's any harm in delaying. Do we have a mandate from the state that would, because this is just a revision, we already have a set, we're just okay.
Yes, sir.
So why don't we do that then? Do we have this down as a, yes?
It's on for an action item tonight, which you can,
So we can just amend the agenda to delay it, and then come back to it when we get a little more feedback from some of the others, and you can take a look at it and decide, and we can provide some feedback too if necessary. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Thank you
you for
all.
the hard work on the bylaws. You're breaking ground for the other committees, so
Right.
it's nice of them to fall in line behind you, right? So, very good, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. And I would just like to take a moment to echo again my thanks to our Special Education Advisory Committee, to the representatives here this evening, but to the work done by the group in its entirety. I appreciate the really comprehensive report, and certainly we hear your recommendations, and we'll continue to look forward to working together to address those. So thank you for your time and continued dedication. All right, for the last item I have this evening is a report, an update on the redistricting process. All right, and Justin Briggs is going to provide that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and Dr. Cashwell. I'm here to provide a brief update on the ongoing comprehensive redistricting project. We had our first 2 work sessions on Monday and Wednesday. Cropper GIS provided 2 options for every level to the committee, and the committee spent the evening applying their intimate knowledge of the county to the proposed boundaries and made their own adjustments. And Cropper's going to take their feedback and apply it to new boundaries and provide them with the adjusted boundaries at the next meetings, which will be held on October 7th and 9th. Do you have any questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mrs. Scott.
I just think that with all the information that has come out this week, and I first would like to thank Mr. Jinks for getting that information out so clearly for people. I really do appreciate it. But for those that may not have seen some of the information you've sent out, the maps that were included in these discussions this week, they were just preliminary maps and a starting off point, and Lord knows where it's going to end up at this point in juncture. It was just to start conversations. Do I understand that correctly?
That is correct.
Okay, I just wanted to get that out there for everybody.
And I think that it's safe to assume we're not going to physically move any buildings, so we know where the buildings are going to be.
That's
So the
good.
boundaries are going to be somewhat associated with the building. So you
Common
have to
sense
start
would say
drawing
that.
lines on a map somewhere, and so that's you
Gotta
gotta
have a
start.
starting point, right?
Yes, exactly
Mr.
right.
Chairman?
So, all right, anyone else have thoughts, concerns, or suggestions? Yes, Reverend.
Quick question, so the data, the yields that you're using, if I'm
Yes.
not mistaken, it's 18, 19 numbers, correct?
That is correct.
So is that going to be juxtaposed against the data in regards to future development that we know is coming?
The future development will have numbers that will be tweaked with the 1920 or the September 30th information.
So that would be infused by then?
Not those numbers will be updated. However, the yield information is still currently being worked on, and that was pulled from the end of year student information. So it is still fairly recent. It's not a year old yet. So they will be using that.
So then I guess because I don't think persons were clear on what numbers we were going to use, And I just want to make sure that we are going to infuse those new numbers as far as projected yields from development. And, you know, it's important because I was at one of my schools this week, and there was an apartment complex that was being built that they're still building out, that her school received 50 additional kids, which she had to add 2 classrooms based on that apartment building because of a program in which parents are moving from the city to the county. And if you know anything about a school culture, 2 classes of 50 children that come from a different ethos totally resets your culture. Right. So I just want to make sure that we're getting these numbers right and the yields are reflective of the projected growth as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
So we will be using, so right now they're using the 19 numbers, but will we be using the new numbers going forward that are coming out?
Yeah, if I might, and I see Mr. Sorensen's coming to the podium, but yes, there will be, at various points through the redistricting process, a look not only at current numbers, but at future growth and what's projected there so that that can be accounted for. But Mr. Sorensen, if you want to add specifics to that.
I will add that. So at this point, we are using September data from last school year. Of course, September 3rd is the big day in school enrollment, and we haven't gotten quite there yet. So we're using that to start the process. When we finalize our September 30th enrollment for this school year, we'll update the numbers. Same thing with our yields. We're using our current yield information, I guess, from last school year. We met with the county, I guess, 2 weeks ago to update all that information. And we'll finalize that update, then we'll update the yield projections as well. So it's just a starting point. If you guys probably know that our 5-year projection is pretty flat. So although we are going to change the numbers, we do think the numbers will be consistent. So the work now is not going to be wasted when we update the enrollment data.
Would you explain for the listening public what you mean when you say yields? What do you mean by that?
So we track every development generates the number of students, and we use our historical data for that. So we have counted all of our houses, townhouses, apartments, and condos in the county. We know the number of students that live in those types of units by magisterial district, so we have historical yield. So when there's a new development in the county, even ongoing, we go to the Board of Supervisors meetings every month to give projections on any development that's before the Board of Supervisors. So those are the yields. We look at the type of housing, the district they're built in, and then we have historical base that we project. That type of house and that magisterial district will produce this many students.
And when we say we look at the magisterial district, we're just trying to be more precise in our projections. Is it fair to say that a yield is simply a projection of the number of students at each grade level that will come from a development to be created?
Not quite to grade level, but by elementary, middle, and high.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So in that broader perspective, so it's simply a projection based on historical facts. And those historical facts are gathered, that's not just your mind's working, that includes the work of the county general staff, correct?
Absolutely.
So those, to be clear, the yields that we use and the projections of those yields, that's not simply HCPS projections and yields. Those are from the general government planning department as well, correct? Are they in a consensus with us of the yields?
We review every development with the county staff. So again, a couple of weeks ago, we went and met with that. They have seen our logic because we meet with the county all the time on every development. So they do agree with our yield projections.
Okay.
They haven't calculated them with us, but they are aware of our yield projections and they are in concurrence with them.
Okay, so they certainly hadn't objected to them, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so to the extent that that they believe in the future that there may be a problem, they hadn't brought it to our attention at this point.
That is correct.
All right, and for all that from every intent and purpose and every objective standard, they have agreed with our projections, correct? I mean, we certainly have no reason to believe that they don't agree with what
we have no reason to believe they don't. That is correct.
That's an important point to have and to maintain. And to make sure they know if they ever do not agree with our methodology of our projections, that they should say so.
That is correct.
Okay. Let's invite the criticism in the event that there's a disagreement.
And Mr. Briggs works closely with the county planning staff. Again, we're there every month to talk about development. So it's an ongoing conversation with Mr. Briggs and county staff on our numbers.
Because the members of the Board of Supervisors rely upon that as well, and we certainly want to be accurate. And so it sounds like to me that between the two teams, we've come up with a good projection.
We believe we have, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. There was something else. Did somebody else have a comment about this point of things? Okay, very good. Well, there's a lot of work yet to be done, but it's, as in anything, it's a journey of many, many steps, but the first have been taken, so drive on. Drive on. All right, anything else for this group? Very good.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Briggs and Mr. Sorensen, and of course to all of the committee members who are busy at work on this redistricting endeavor. We'll look forward to continuing to bring the board updates. That concludes items for the superintendent for this evening.
Well, thank you very much. Members of the board, that brings us to the point of our agenda for any new business, I beg your pardon, any unfinished business of the board. Any new business of the board? Well, the next item that we have is at 5:30, we are scheduled to have a public hearing to solicit input on proposed revisions to the 2018-2025 strategic plan. And so until that time comes, we'll recess and reconvene at 5:30. Thank you.